The Niger Delta nights were unlike any others. They were nights that glowed with fire and bled with smoke. Even the stars, when they dared to shine, seemed dimmed by the angry flames that rose from the swamps. The mangroves twisted like claws, their roots sinking into waters darkened with oil, and the air carried a heaviness that clung to skin and lungs alike. In this place, life was both gift and curse. For the people, oil was wealth, but never theirs. For the children, oil was survival, but survival came at the cost of innocence. And in the middle of it all was Ekene, a boy of 12 who walked barefoot through the soot-soaked paths with a rusted jerrycan slung over his shoulder. His small frame bent under its weight, but he kept moving, his steps careful, practiced and sure. They called him the boy who never slept. Ekene's eyes told the story before his lips could. Wide, weary, ringed with shadows, they belonged to someone who carried burdens too heavy for his years. His face bore small scars, faint but visible, marks of the fire that licked too close. His clothes were little more than torn rags stained in oil, clinging to his thin, hardened body. Yet despite it all, there was a stubbornness in him. Each night, he returned to the swamp. Each day he returned home with just enough to keep his family alive. His father had once been the strength of the household, a fisherman who cast his nets at dawn, and returned with baskets of tilapia and bonga. He would laugh as he carried his son on his shoulders, promising him a life better than his own. But that life ended in fire. One pipeline explosion, one of the many that scarred the Delta, robbed the village of fathers, sons, and brothers in a single night. Among them was Ekene's father, swallowed by flames that lit the sky red. The family never saw his body. Only smoke. Only silence. Ekene's mother, Madame Paribai, was left with 3 children and no answers. She was a woman carved by grief yet forced to stand, because the world gave her no choice. She wore her wrapper tightly, her hair often hidden under a scarf, her eyes red from weeping. But she stood. For her children, she stood. Ekene, though barely a teenager, took the role of man of the house. He could not bear to watch his younger sisters cry for food. He could not stand the empty look in his mother's eyes when she tried to stretch nothing into something. And so he went where other boys went, to the refineries hidden deep in the swamps, the coal fire that turned children into laborers and laborers into ghosts. There, the nights roared with danger. Makeshift pipes hissed, flames cracked against drums filled with crude, and men coughed until their lungs rattled. The smoke was thick enough to choke the moon. Ekene worked among them silently, holding pipes steady, carrying containers, patching leaks with his bare hands. The fumes stung his eyes, burned his chest, and left him trembling long after the fire died. But he never stopped. One of the older men, his face lined with years of soot, once pulled him aside. "Small boy," he said, his voice broken by smoke, "this life will finish you. You should be in school, not here." Ekene looked up at him, his eyes tired yet defiant. "School cannot fill an empty stomach," he replied softly. And with that, he went back to work. At home, his mother often pleaded with him. "Ekene," she would cry, wiping his face with a cloth as soot stained her hands. "You will kill yourself in that place. You are all I have left. Your sisters need you alive." He wanted to tell her the truth, that he was already dying in small pieces, that each breath of smoke, each sleepless night, each burn on his skin chipped away at him. But instead he whispered, "Mama, if I don't work, who will feed us?" She had no answer. The rich men never saw this side of the swamp. They arrived in tinted SUVs, their shoes never touching the mud, their perfumes masking the stench of oil. They wore pressed suits or embroidered kaftans, their voices calm, their hands soft. They stood at the edges, watching from a distance, as children carried their fortune on bent backs. To them, boys like Ekene were invisible, shadows among shadows. The soldiers came too. Their boots stomped through the village without warning, rifles in hand. They called the work illegal, but everyone knew why they came. They dragged men out, beat them, demanded bribes, and left with pockets heavy. The villagers whispered that the soldiers and the oil barons were no different, both took, neither gave. One night, the swamp grew restless. The flames hissed louder, the pipes groaned as though they would burst. The workers muttered uneasily, their hands quick but shaky. Ekene held a pipe, his small body straining, when it happened. The explosion tore through the swamp like thunder. Fire leapt skyward, splitting the night open. Men screamed, some vanishing into the blaze, others collapsing in the mud. Oil poured like black rivers, feeding the flames. The air turned to fire, the ground to ash. Ekene was thrown backward, his body slamming against the roots of a mangrove. Heat seared his skin, his arm burning raw. He could not hear his own screams over the roar of the inferno. He crawled, his breath ragged, his body trembling. Around him, men ran ablaze, their bodies human torches stumbling into the river. Some never rose again. The swamp became a graveyard lit by its own curse. By dawn, silence lay heavy over the land. Dozens were gone. Mothers wailed, clutching the earth as though it might return their sons. Fathers stared into the smoke, hollow-eyed. Ekene stumbled home, his arm bandaged crudely, his face scarred, his body shaking. His mother fell to her knees, holding him tightly, sobbing into his chest. "Why must our children pay the price of men's greed?" she cried, her voice raw, her tears soaking his soot-stained shirt. But the world moved on quickly. The soldiers returned, demanding money from grieving families. Chiefs in their compounds held feasts, untouched by the flames. The wealthy men came again, unbothered, their tankers waiting. For every boy lost, another was pushed into the swamp. The wheel of poverty spun without mercy. Yet, out of the ashes, a spark of hope emerged. News of the explosion reached the city. Journalists came, their cameras capturing the blackened swamp and the faces of children who had seen too much. One photograph stood out. A boy, scarred, soot-stained, his jerrycan by his side, his eyes hauntingly awake. That boy was Ekene. His story spread. People asked, "Who is this boy who never slept?" NGOs reached out, offering help. For the first time in years, he saw a classroom. He held a pencil in his hand instead of a pipe. His scars did not fade, but he wore them like armor, reminders of survival. His sisters laughed again, their coughs easing with better food, better care. His mother prayed louder, her tears softer. Still, the swamp remained. Still, other boys carried jerrycans into the fire. For every Ekene, 100 more remained unseen. And as he sat by the classroom window, his eyes sometimes drifted back to the horizon, where the flames still rose each night. They called him the boy who never slept. But his story was not his alone. It was the story of a people silenced, a land consumed, a generation robbed of dreams. And until the flames died, until the rivers ran clear again, until no child had to trade sleep for survival, his story would echo across the swamps, across the cities, across the silence. Because silence is not innocence. Silence is complicity.